Live way.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Sparkman. I like to say, 1/4 of the dream team of week 8. We are covering socio-political externalities, and we will be covering John Warner's book, Sustainable, Resilient, Free, The Future of Public Higher Education. I will be starting off our discussion tonight, just pointing out some things that, stood out to me in the book. So one of the major things that stood out to me was John Warner did a great job of talking about a lot of issues that each of us will discuss. Mine in particular was competition and rankings in higher education and how that played a huge impact on higher education in the U.S. He did a great job at connecting some of the historical context and how that still applies now. This book was released in around 2021, so a lot of the things that he is connecting is definitely present today as well in higher education. So one of the historical contexts he brought up was how U.S. rankings back in the 1980s, how they ranked higher education through word of mouth, peer reviewed survey, how that survey transformed from a survey to criteria that was literally ranking schools based off wealth, and how that first ranking then created a whole agenda in higher education where it was mostly focused on the money that they can get and not the quality of education that they put out. One of the solutions that I've seen is that John Warner discussed was direct funding of public higher education is the only way to increase the funding to historically underfunded institution. As long as we have a system where schools compete on prestige, price, and revenue, follow prestige, those with a mission oriented around access and opportunity will have a disadvantage. That solution, one of the things that I'm scared about is higher education too far gone? We think about these institutions, and he mentioned a lot about institutions focusing on, making sure the athletic program is right, making sure that the donors are paying a lot of money. And just putting that out there, especially in our group and those watching in the class who will interact with our discussion. Do you feel that higher education may be too far gone? And just give your own, those in the class that is watching our group, do you feel, what are some ideas you think can bring higher education back to a place where we are focused on quality education more than the brand and the prestige in education? Then Marianne, what are some things that you seen in the book that pointed out to you?
Well, Brandon, I really appreciated that he recognized the competitiveness. I mean, every week I meet in academic standards, or I have students in my office, and we are constantly negotiating as a university the price point, how much it's going to cost for them to go to school, whether or not they're going to stay if they're academic successful. And he didn't get down to the micro level, but the truth is universities budget based on enrollment. And if you don't make that enrollment, then you don't have the money to, pay your bills, not just build the new building or support that program. So I appreciated that he talked about it and made me feel less alone in those conversations. And that coming out of COVID, he recognizes the importance of education, and he saw it as a public good. So I really appreciated that, because it's something, as I said, I deal with all the time. And I also like that he has willingness to think differently. It's a pretty big statement to say free education, to embrace that. My concern about that is he's talking about publics and he's not talking about privates. And I did go look, as I mentioned, I think in other groups with us, I did go look at the IPEDS data, and it does show that, yes, public universities graduate more than private universities, except interestingly in Illinois and Missouri. That's not true. And so public universities that are smaller, not the Princetons of the world or the Yale, who don't have that kind of money, will actually be at an extreme disadvantage. And honestly, they're usually more nimble. My father, who's a businessman, was talking about this last night. He said, the upper echelons, the upper echelon of the school my size is the friend I go to Disney World with. It's not, it's not like, I don't know the president. I could knock on his door right now and go in and talk to him, and he knows my name, he knows my concerns, and he knows what I do. So we're not talking about the same experience. And I think large schools are wonderful. So I'm in no way being disrespectful of those. I just think he doesn't recognize that some universities will not survive free education, and it's still going to have the same competitiveness. So let's pretend that it's $10,000 a student. Well, that public university needs that $10,000, but so does that other public university. So they're still going to be competing for those students because they need those bodies in seat to get that revenue. And I don't think he acknowledges that, and I don't think his numbers are realistic. If I sit down to put a budget, I think that he is assuming it's like when I have $20 in my pocket and I've spent that $20 100 times before I actually, spend it. So I'm concerned about that. And at the end, in his appendix, he talks about athletics, and they would be funded. Right now, university athletics, in Missouri, I see it all the time, that the athletes are endorsing, right? They're getting paid in a way they couldn't. However, right now, they have to deal with academic standards. So a system that doesn't have to worry about if your athlete's eligible, it's not going to be tied to universities anymore at all, because that's not advantageous to them. So they'll move those out into semi-pro leagues, and we'll have less students who graduate from high school who go into college to play a sport. They'll just go directly to pros, whether that's semi-professional, they won't go to university. So I think he's missing some key points that are important conversations to have, but he's opened the door for those conversations by saying, hey, let's think about free education. I would personally would like for him to talk a little bit more about, are there better ways to fund students who are disadvantaged? Why in the world is the interest rate so high for school loans? Well, isn't there a better way to do that? I think there are other things that maybe he's opened the door for. Sometimes when you go for the big thing, it's easier to talk about the small things. Mm-hmm. So, those are my ideas. So, Krista, how about you? What did you like about the book or find interesting, thought-provoking?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll tell you, I was truly enlightened by this book. I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old at home, and they're going to be affected by rising tuition rates. And it never hit me when you hear it on the news, we're forgiving student loans. I was the first, before I read this book, to say, well, I paid my student loan. Everybody should pay their student loan. I had no idea that this whole loan game is this vicious cycle that isn't even just about student loans. It's about poaching at other schools. And, it's about taking away traditional learning. And like I said, it's this vicious cycle. And when Brandon said, are we too far gone? After reading this book, I was a little nervous because I almost feel like we are too far gone. If we just keep rising these costs, we're not going to have higher education as we know it anymore. MOOCs, they're just going to take over. Kids are it's not going to be 1,000 in a lecture hall anymore and then going back to your dorm. It's going to be thousands sitting on a computer, and being told to mute and just being lectured at. And the whole college experience will just be removed. And, I have to say $1.6 trillion we are in debt. It has to be dealt with. It can't. I agree with you, Marianne. His numbers didn't add up. We can't just say 1.6 trillion, presto, it's gone. And now everything's free. We've talked a few times about inviting the government into our classrooms. And it seems like John Warner is really big on that. But as I was doing my last paper, I researched, other perspectives. And somebody, I can't think of the author's name, they really brought up a good point about the government's sometimes unreliable. So if we are saying, let's take away all tuition, government's going to pay for it. Look back at the GI Bill. So back in the 80s, it kept getting halted. And it was because Congress was arguing too much about it. We're doing this, we're doing that. And as it's getting halted, people are in limbo who are counting on this GI Bill to pay their college tuition. And I just feel like Warner is so big on saying we need to get back to, the government funding 100%. But what happened? We're in a recession. What happens when the government just says, I can't do it. We're not giving this money. So I felt like his problems were so clearly defined. He really opened my eyes with this is an issue. His solutions he didn't explain them very well. His arithmetic kind of just went all over the place. To me, it just wasn't a concrete solution. I don't have a solution. I wish I did, because I'm reading that one college is, I think they said they send out 30 recruiters for LSU. And they're purposely recruiting people in other states because that's a higher cost. They're paying the out-of-state tuition. They're poaching. And then who suffers? The kids who have no choice but to go to that in-state school. Now that the kids who normally would have paid in-state tuition have been poached and gone to another school outside of their state, what happens to their tuition? It rises. And he did have a very good point about investing in where it needs it. So he did. I wish he would have said more on it. It was only about a paragraph or two, but he said, we have inner city schools, or we have neighborhoods of kids that we are just not investing in. And that's where that's where the grants need to go. Because again, they're leaving. They're going to these other schools who have these lovely luxury facilities. And again, it's a vicious cycle. I got to build my school. We forget about our educational mission statement because we're so far into building and making us, keeping up with the Joneses. We need the best athletic facility so that we could poach more people. And it's just this cycle. And I'm just like, I don't know. Are my kids going to have a traditional college experience, or is it just going to collapse and we are all going to be virtual learning? I don't know, Kemba. I kind of went off on a tangent. So what were your thoughts, Kemba, about John Warner's book?
When you say tangential, format, this is what this book incites. It makes us think in pairwise combinations of different ways to think about this issue. But one thing I applaud Warner on is that he's asking the hard questions. He's putting it out there. Albeit he's very nonspecific in the solutions, he is provoking us to this thought. So one thing that really got to me is that his oversimplification of, and we all talk about this, of how we get this funding for education. He pretty much was like, hey, figure it out. Let's get creative. And that was it. He even criticized our lack of creativity with finding funding for public education, which I didn't know if he was being sarcastic or real, but I realized that he was, he was being directly, saying that we need to be better at coming up with solutions, but he doesn't really offer any that go in depth, to your point. What was poignant to me is despite this trillions of dollars that you talk about, almost $2 trillion worth of student loan debt, one thing that I noticed that he didn't address a lot is the deeper issue, which is a lack of financial literacy. And the mindset shift is more important at this point than just pointing out that we need to fund. Because as you pointed out, Marianne, and you guys, Brandon, all of you guys, Krista, you talked about if we have the funding, then what? We still need to be able to allocate the funds wisely. And then students need to have the educational background to make wise decisions. As a student, I got a lot of student loans. And Krista, I really admire your rethinking on the perspectives about student loan repayment for some kids, because they really came in happy to get a rare opportunity to go to school. And then it just became a survival game. How do I stay in school? How do I stay and be and make a difference in my community? And I'll do anything I can to get it. And that's albeit the student loans come in. One thing that I try to connect in the privatization aspect was that when you think about privatization, you really think about some of the issues you were talking about, the mission, the idea of the mission-based learning being more corporate in nature. And when you're dealing with tax funds versus consumer funds, then you're limited in a lot of ways on what you can do. The people and the ideals and the mission go out the door, and then business comes in. And that connection to the book, Everything Privatization by Cohen, it really tries to connect. I try to connect that with the idea that you can shelter and kind of harbor some of the old traditional things like segregation. It talked about the Brown versus education, where, yeah, I can use my funding to privatization to fund, but then what about me harboring choices? Like I only will select these students for this college. And then so it gives you the power to do that and being unregulated is a dangerous thing. So the book just really goes all over the spectrum as far as these externalities. And, as far as solutions, I'm like you, Crystal, my whole thing is the mindset change. I think we need to address that before we talk about throwing funding and paying for school, because I'm a big proponent of paying for school, but at the right way. Doing it in a way where we are funding kids for inalienable right to get an education. And it does do good for the public good, right? The public good is to increase the workforce, increase global competitiveness. And by doing so, we increase diversity, we increase, lack of poverty, because the Pew research organization saw that there's a connection to, living above the poverty line and having a college education. That's relative to each opportunity. We should change the idea about like what we, our mindsets around making better decisions with the money so we can be in a better place. So that's the only thing that I would do is starting a solution fund and educate. So
I agree.
so.
Invest in your citizens. That's the key.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with everybody. I'm sorry, Kemba.
No, go.
I feel like because we're asynchronous, we don't get this opportunity to, just do nothing but discuss our views. So I enjoyed talking with you guys. You're a great group.
Same here. Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.